Ever had the ground disappear under your feet? Not metaphorically. Literally. The solid earth you're standing on turns to air. And you're falling through space trying to remember how to breathe. That's what episode 2's ending was. A video. 8 words that destroy everything. We've known where he sleeps for a while. Not weeks. Not months. Since before Zuri was even pregnant. And there's a man in that video. A man Jihan buried 3 years ago. A man he watched die. His father. Tonight, a black woman who fought to keep her baby safe learns that her entire journey, every sacrifice, every choice, every moment she thought was hers, was part of a plan laid out by a dead man who might not be dead at all. If you survived a betrayal where you realized nothing in your life was accidental, drop your city in the comments. Because this story is about discovering that the people you love most might have been hunting you the entire time. This is episode 3. And the truth is darker than you think. The Midnight Discovery. The apartment is silent in the way that only comes at midnight when the world has surrendered to sleep, and the only people awake are the ones carrying unbearable truths. Mrs. Kim's sister's apartment is small, barely 700 square feet, but it feels smaller now. Compressed. Like the walls are moving inward, pressing down on everyone inside. The living room has a window that looks out onto Gangnam's nightlife, the neon signs and late-night restaurants still glowing, still thriving, still existing in a world where normal things happen and normal people go about their normal lives. Jihan and Zuri are not normal people tonight. Jihan's hands shake as he rewinds the video for the 7th time. Not because he doesn't understand what he's seeing. Understanding it is worse than not understanding. Understanding it means accepting that reality itself has been fraudulent. That the ground he thought was solid has been hollow all along. The frame freezes on a man's silhouette. Familiar jawline. The particular set of the shoulders. The way he stands. That exact posture that's burned into Jihan's muscle memory from 17 years of living in the same house with him. Watching him move through rooms like he owned not just the space but the air molecules in it. Han Jin-ho. His father. Dead for 3 years. Except the timestamp says the video was recorded 5 months ago. Zuri is sitting on the small couch, still in her hospital scrubs from her shift, still carrying the faint smell of antiseptic and human pain. She's holding a cup of tea that went cold 3 hours ago. Her hand is shaking so badly that the cup rattles against the saucer with a sound like someone dying. "That's not possible," she whispers. Her voice sounds like it belongs to someone else. Someone hollow, someone whose foundation just cracks straight through the center. "You said he died. You went to the funeral. You told me about it. You wept." Jihan doesn't answer immediately. He's rewinding again, watching the impossible man move through what looks like a basement office. Dark wood paneling. The kind of space that exists in old money and older crimes. Soul's underbelly, the part that never sees daylight. The part where deals get made in whispers and people learn that their entire world was constructed on lies. There's someone else in the frame. A woman, middle-aged, Korean, with eyes that remind Zuri of Jihan in a way that makes her stomach turn over. Something in the shape of her face, the intensity of her gaze. It's like looking at a female version of Jihan before he learned how to hide everything behind that mask of controlled power. "That's my biological mother," Jihan says, and his voice has gone hollow. Like something essential has been removed from inside his chest, leaving behind only the shape of where it used to be. "The woman who gave birth to me. She died when I was 12. "No," Zuri says. Not a question. A denial. A refusal of this reality. A woman trying to reject the universe itself for being so cruel. "Your mother is the woman who raised you, Mrs. Han. She's different," Jihan finishes. "Yes. There are 2 mothers in my life. The one who created me biologically, the woman in this video, and the one who chose to raise me, who loved me when she didn't have to. Those are not the same thing." He stands, walks to the window, presses his forehead against the glass. Outside, Seoul continues. The city doesn't know that everything has changed. The city doesn't care. "Her name was Han Mi-sun," Jihan continues, still looking out at the city. "She was a surgical nurse at Seoul Metropolitan Hospital. She worked double shifts. She was always tired, but she never let us see it. She would come home and she would sit with me and she would listen to everything I'd done that day at school. Every test. Every friend interaction. Every moment of childhood drama that I thought was the most important thing in the world." He turns back to face the room. When I was 12, she died in a car accident. Or that's what my father told me. She was driving home from the hospital. It was raining. The roads were wet. She lost control on a curve. By the time anyone found her, she'd been dead for an hour. He sits back down and Zuri notices that his hands are still shaking. Not panic. Something deeper. The kind of tremor that comes from your entire sense of self being revealed as fiction. He turns up the volume on the laptop. The audio is grainy like it was recorded through a wall or with a cheap microphone. But the words come through with devastating clarity. The man's voice, his father's voice, is exactly as Jihan remembers it. Deep, measured, every word chosen with the precision of someone who knows that words have weight, that words have consequences, that words once spoken can never be fully taken back. His father's voice fills the small apartment like a ghost materializing. The American girl and the baby are insurance. If anything happens to me, if the business falters, if the authorities move too close, they become leverage. Jihan will come back. Blood is the only thing he still respects. Blood and blood-based obligations. Family duty. The weight of continuity. The video shifts angle. Now it's a closer view of the two people. His father and the woman who gave him life and then vanished from it. The woman he was told was dead for 22 years. And if he doesn't come back? If his love for them isn't enough? If he's truly become someone different? Someone who doesn't value family above all else? The woman's voice is softer than Jihan expected, but colder. Clinical, like she's discussing a business transaction, not a grandson, not a son. Then we use the child directly. Boys like Jihan, men like Jihan, they're dangerous because they believe they're untouchable. Remove that belief. Make him touchable. Make him weak. Make him afraid. Make him regret every choice he's made to become legitimate. That's when he becomes useful again. That's when he'll do anything I ask. The video continues, showing Han Jin-ho moving around the office, picking up documents, making notes. He looks comfortable, like he's been in this basement doing this work the entire time he's supposedly been dead. How long do we wait? The woman asks. Until he's invested enough in the woman and the child to panic. Until he's built a life that matters to him. Until he believes that losing them would be worse than any death he could imagine. That's when leverage becomes absolute. Zuri stands abruptly. She walks to the small kitchen. Not even a real kitchen, just a hot plate and a sink and the kind of space where people heat up instant noodles and pretend it's a meal, and vomits into the sink. The sound of her retching echoes through the tiny apartment. The sound of a body rejecting what her mind has just learned. When she comes back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, her eyes are red but her voice is steady. The steadiness of someone who's gone past the point of panic into a state of crystalline clarity. How long have you known about this? She asks. 40 minutes longer than you, Jihan says. It came to my encrypted email. No sender. No explanation. Just a link in a file. I didn't believe what I was seeing until I played it 6 times. Your father is supposed to be dead. I know. You buried him. You held a funeral. You restructured the entire company, because you thought you were inheriting a legacy you didn't want. I know. She sits back down. The silence between them is so heavy it has weight. It presses down on Zuri's chest, makes it hard to breathe. She looks at her son's father, this man she chose to love, this man who promised her transparency, this man who she's learning might have never known his own life was constructed on lies. Tell me everything, she says. All of it. From the beginning. And don't leave anything out this time. Not because I'm angry. Because I need to understand how we got here. The 17 years before. Jihan stands. He needs to move. Sitting still feels impossible. He walks to the kitchen, opens a bottle of water, drinks it without tasting it. Then he comes back and sits next to Zuri on the couch. I was born in Seoul, Jihan begins. My biological mother, Han Mi-sun, she was a nurse. My biological father, Han Jin-ho. He was already in the organization. He was going to inherit a small criminal operation from his family. The kind of thing that Seoul has always had, the kind of thing that every major city in the world has. A shadow business. A way to make money through channels that governments pretend don't exist. He pauses, gathering the threads of a story he's never fully told to anyone. My mother knew what he was, Jihan continues. She wasn't naive. She grew up in Seoul. She knew what power looked like. But she also knew that my father loved her in his way. And she loved him. So they had me. They built a family inside the criminal organization, which is not the wisest choice, but it's the choice they made. He stands again, unable to stay still. For the first 12 years of my life, I had both parents. My mother was everything soft about my world. Everything human. She would come home from the hospital smelling like antiseptic and kindness, and she would sit with me and she would listen like my words mattered, like my existence mattered. She balanced out my father's coldness, his focus on strategy and power and the accumulation of wealth through morally questionable means. He walks to the window again. And then when I was 12 years old, she disappeared. The car accident, Zuri says quietly. That's what I was told, Jihan replies. A car accident. Rain. Lost control. Found her at the bottom of an embankment. Dead for an hour, no survivors. I didn't question it. Children don't question the narratives that adults construct for them. I accepted my mother's death the way children accept impossible things, with confusion and pain and a kind of numb resignation. He turns back to face her. But now, watching this video, I have to consider the possibility that my father orchestrated her death, or allowed it to happen, or used it as a cover for something else. Because the woman in this video, the woman he's clearly maintaining contact with, the woman he's clearly planning with, is supposed to be that dead mother. She's supposed to be a corpse at the bottom of an embankment. Instead, she's here. Alive. Orchestrating. Zuri tries to process this. Tries to fit the concept into the shape of the man sitting next to her. What happened after? She asks. After your mother died? I was sent to live with my adoptive mother, the woman I call Mrs. Han. She wasn't my biological mother, but she was willing to take me in. Willing to raise me. Willing to love me even though I wasn't hers by blood. She gave me stability when my world had shattered. She gave me an alternative to my father's cold calculation. He sits back down and Zuri notices that his whole body seems heavier. Like the weight of these memories is compressing him. My father disappeared into the business for 6 months, Jihan continues. When he emerged, the organization had evolved. It had grown. It had become the kind of operation that doesn't require morality, only ruthlessness. I think what happened is this. My father used my mother's death as an opportunity. With her gone, with no one to balance out his coldness, he was able to expand the business into territories and methods that would have horrified her. He was able to become fully himself without apology. The 3-year lie. I've been trying to understand the timeline, Jihan says, pulling out his phone, scrolling through the documents that Detective Park sent him earlier. When exactly did my father stop being dead and start being alive? When exactly did this conspiracy begin? He shows Zuri a series of bank transfers on his screen. Years of them. Money moving through accounts that Jihan thought had been closed after his father's death. Payments made to shell companies. Contracts signed by people who were supposed to be dead. 3 years ago, Jihan explains, my father was supposed to die of cancer. I was with him in the hospital. I watched him deteriorate. Or I watched someone deteriorate. I watched a man who looked like my father lay in a hospital bed and fade away. And then there was a funeral. Closed casket. I didn't verify that the body inside was actually my father because that would have been disrespectful. Sons don't open their father's caskets. So I took it as fact. I accepted it as truth. He closes the phone. After the funeral, Jihan continues, I started restructuring Bo Group. I thought I was cleaning it up. I thought I was making my father's legacy into something I could live with. Something that wouldn't make me complicit in crimes. Something that would let me exist in the world with a clean conscience. But your father orchestrated that, Zuri says quietly. He guided you. Every step of the way, Jihan replies. I thought I was making my own choices. I thought I was being clever and strategic. But looking at these documents now, I can see his fingerprints on every decision I made. He wanted me to believe I was cleaning it up. He wanted me to stop paying attention to what was actually happening in the business. He wanted me to think I was in control while he maintained power from the shadows. He stands, walks to the kitchen, pours another glass of water. And it worked, he says. I was so focused on what I thought I was doing, becoming legitimate, building a life I could be proud of, that I didn't notice what was actually happening. Money was still moving through the old channels. The illegal operations were still running, but they were hidden under layers of shell companies and dummy transfers and the kind of obfuscation that takes years to untangle. He returns to the couch. So for 3 years, Jihan continues, my supposedly dead father was orchestrating everything. He was moving money. He was accumulating power. He was gathering leverage on people in government, in the judiciary, in the police force. He was building an empire within an empire. And I thought he was dead. Part 2. The history that wasn't 20 minutes. The woman before. Zuri reaches for Jihan's hand. She holds it, and she feels how cold his fingers are. Like the blood has drained out of him. Like his body is rejecting the reality his mind has been forced to accept. Tell me about the surveillance on G, she says. The daycare. The cameras. When did that actually start? That's the part that terrifies me the most, Jihan says quietly. According to Detective Park, the surveillance started 8 months ago. But I didn't meet you until 8 months ago, Zuri finishes. Before I knew I was pregnant. Before I told you about Mji. Before I had any idea that you were even aware of my existence. The implication hangs between them like a guillotine blade. My father was watching you before I knew you existed, Jihan says. His voice is hollow. Which means this wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned. This was orchestrated. He specifically chose you. He specifically made sure that I would meet you. That I would fall in love with you. That I would have a son with you. All of it was part of his master plan. Zuri feels her chest tighten. How is that even possible? She asks. How could he arrange for us to meet? That's the part I'm still trying to understand, Jihan replies. But I have theories. My father had contacts everywhere. In the diner where you worked. In the neighborhood where you lived. In the places you traveled. He could have easily arranged a situation where we'd meet. A friend of a friend. A chance encounter that wasn't actually chance. A moment of connection that felt spontaneous, but was actually engineered. He stands again, and Zuri realizes that he can't stay still when he's processing betrayal. That movement is the only way he can tolerate the weight of understanding. I think, Jihan continues, that my father identified you as someone who was vulnerable. A single woman working multiple jobs. Someone who was struggling. Someone who would be attracted to power and security and the promise of stability. Someone who would be easy to manipulate. Someone who would give him a grandson. Jesus, Zuri whispers. She pulls her hand away from his. Not in anger. In self-protection. So none of it was real. None of this was real. You didn't actually meet me. I was assigned to you like a business deal. That's not true, Jihan says, and his voice is sharp enough to cut. What happened between us, the way I felt when I saw you, that was real. The love I have for you and for our son, that's real. But the initial meeting, the way we were brought together, that was orchestrated. And I didn't know. I was a pawn in his game just as much as you were. Zuri stands, walks away from him. She needs space. She needs to think. How do you know this? She asks, not turning around. How are you certain that this isn't just my father being paranoid and strategic, but not actually orchestrating your entire life? Because, Jihan says, Detective Park found documentation. She found records of payments made to people in your neighborhood. To people who would have had access to information about you. To people who could have engineered situations where we'd interact. She found evidence that my father was gathering intelligence on you before I ever met you. He pulls out his phone again, shows her the documents. Detective Park's handwriting. Official seals. The kind of evidence that courts use to convict people. And there's more, Jihan continues. There are communications between my father and the woman in the video. The woman who's supposed to be my dead mother. They're discussing you specifically. They're discussing your vulnerabilities. They're discussing why you'd be the perfect candidate to give my father a grandson who could be used as leverage. The plan within the plan. Zuri returns to the couch. She sits down, but she doesn't get close to Jihan. She sits at the far end, wrapped in her own arms. So what was the plan? She asks. What's the end game? What's my father trying to accomplish? I think, Jihan says slowly, That the plan was to establish UNG as my weakness. He wanted me to build a life that I loved. A family. A reason to care about something other than power. And then he was going to use you to control me. He was going to threaten you. Threaten the baby. And I would do anything to keep you safe. I would come back to the business. I would become his tool again. I would stop trying to be legitimate and start being the ruthless version of myself that he needed me to be. But then we discovered the surveillance, Zuri says. We found the cameras. We forced you to tell me the truth. We disrupted his plan, Jihan agrees. We destroyed his timeline. He expected me to handle the threat quietly, to use security and resources and the apparatus of control to protect you. He expected me to become the version of myself that he's always known. But instead I told you the truth. I let you lead. I let you decide how to respond. He looks at her. And that, Jihan continues, was not part of his plan. He didn't account for a woman who was willing to fight. He didn't account for someone who would demand partnership instead of protection. He didn't account for love being stronger than leverage. The document trail. Zuri's phone buzzes. A notification. Detective Park is texting her. There are more documents. More evidence. The investigation is deepening. We need to see Detective Park, Zuri says. We need to understand the full scope of this. We need to know exactly what your father has been planning. Jihan nods. They gather their things, leave the apartment quietly so as not to wake Mrs. Kim's sister. The night is still young in Seoul, even though midnight has passed. The city moves through its cycles of sleep and waking, and midnight is just another moment in an endless sequence of moments. The police station. Detective Park Soo-jin is not a woman who sleeps. Or if she does, she doesn't allow it to interfere with her work. She's at Seoul Central Police Station at 2 a.m. with a folder thick enough to be a novel, and the kind of expression that people get when they've spent the entire night staring at evidence that rewrites everything they thought they understood about a case. She's younger than Jihan expected. Maybe late 40s with the kind of face that's seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. She sits in the interrogation room. Not because Jihan is being interrogated, but because it's the most secure space in the building. And she spreads out documents on the metal table like a dealer laying out cards. Your father, she says directly to Jihan without any preamble, isn't just alive. He never stopped running Bo Group. Every decision you made, every division you shut down, every business restructure you implemented, it was part of his plan. He was orchestrating you like a chess piece. Jihan nods slowly, like he's confirming something he already suspected at the cellular level. The men watching your son, Detective Park continues, they're reporting directly to Han Jin-ho. They're not independent actors. They're not enemies you've made through your business dealings. They're his employees following his orders, doing exactly what he told them to do. Which is? Zuri asks, though she's beginning to understand. Creating the circumstances for Jihan to panic, to revert to old patterns, to become protective in the violent way that gangsters become protective, with security teams and hidden cameras and all the apparatus of control. They were designed to make you feel like your world was being invaded, so you'd respond the way your father predicted you'd respond. Detective Park opens the folder. Photographs, documents, bank statements, years of financial records that tell a story of a man orchestrating from beyond the grave. Or from beyond supposed death more accurately. Han Jin-ho has been running a parallel operation, Detective Park explains, pointing to the documents. On the surface, Bo Group appears to be restructuring, going legitimate. But underneath there's a second business running through shadow accounts, shell companies and dead drops. He's been moving money, accumulating power, and most importantly, gathering leverage on people in the government, the judiciary, the police force. She points to a photograph. Jihan's father, looking thinner than Jihan remembers, but definitely alive, definitely real. Standing in front of a building marked with an address that means nothing to Jihan, but clearly means something to Detective Park. This building, Detective Park says, is where your father has been living for the past 3 years. It's registered to a shell company. No one who lives there uses their real name. No one who enters uses the front door. It's a fortress. Your father built a life in hiding, while everyone thought he was dead. The state's deal. But here's where it gets complicated. Detective Park continues, and she slides another document across the table. Official paperwork. Government seals. The kind of documentation that changes everything. 3 days ago, Detective Park says, Han Jin-ho walked into Seoul Central Police Station and requested protective custody. He said he was going to turn state's evidence against his own organization in exchange for immunity and witness protection. The words hang in the air like a bomb that hasn't detonated yet. He's doing what? Jihan's voice is barely audible. Your father, Detective Park says clearly, is sacrificing his organization to save himself. He's going to disappear into a government protection program. But before he does, he's going to take down everyone in Bo Group who didn't know about his master plan. He's going to burn the whole operation down, but only the parts that don't directly serve him. She leans forward. Here's the thing, Detective Park continues. Han Jin-ho is not making this deal because he's reformed. He's not making this deal because he feels guilty about what he's done. He's making this deal because he's afraid. He knows that there are people in the organization who are going to move against him now that they know he's alive. People who feel betrayed. People who want revenge. People who've been paying into his system for decades and now realize they've been played. She pulls out another document. So he's turning them in to protect himself. He's using the government as insurance. And in exchange, he gets immunity for all his business crimes. What about his crimes against family? Zuri asks quietly. What about the surveillance on G? What about orchestrating our relationship? Detective Park looks at Zuri directly, and there's something almost like respect in her expression. Good question, Detective Park says. That's what we need to talk about. Because his immunity doesn't extend to personal crimes against family members. It doesn't extend to child endangerment. It doesn't extend to conspiracy to commit fraud or attempted coercion. So even though he gets immunity on the business crimes, his actions toward you and toward Nji, those could still be prosecutable. The custody petition. Detective Park slides another document across the table. Jihan reads it and his face goes pale. He's filed a petition with family court, Detective Park explains. He's claiming guardianship rights to Nji. He can't, Zuri starts to say, but Detective Park interrupts her. Legally speaking, it's complicated, Detective Park replies. Han Jin-ho is arguing that as the biological grandfather, he has a right to know his grandson. He's claiming that Jihan, as a criminal defendant with a history of violent behavior, might not be an appropriate sole guardian. He's asking the court to mandate supervised visits. She pulls out another document. A legal brief. Official court stamps. Jihan's father's signature. Clear and unmistakable. He's claiming, Detective Park continues, that his motivation is family preservation, that he wants to build a relationship with his grandson, that he's reformed and genuinely interested in being part of the child's life. The court has agreed to a hearing. 3 weeks from now. Zuri stands abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor harshly. He can't have him, she says, and her voice is absolute, is terrifying in its certainty. That man orchestrated surveillance on my baby. That man used my son as leverage. That man sees children as tools. He will not have supervised visits or guardianship or any legal standing in G's life. I will fight that with every resource I have. I will fight it in every court in every jurisdiction if I have to. Detective Park nods like she's been waiting for exactly this response. Good, she says. Because you're going to need that fight. Han Jin-ho's legal team is formidable. They're going to argue that Jihan's past makes him an unreliable guardian. They're going to point to his criminal history, his gang affiliations, his history of violence. They're going to suggest that a child would be safer with a grandfather, who's now under government protection, than with a father who's facing prosecution for years of criminal activity. She looks directly at Jihan. And here's the part that's going to hurt. Detective Park continues. In exchange for turning state's evidence, Han Jin-ho gets immunity. Complete immunity. He walks away from every crime he's committed. Every person he's had disappeared. Every deal he's made in blood. He walks away clean, into a new life somewhere else, while you face trial for crimes you committed under his orders, crimes you thought you had no choice but to commit. The path forward. But, Detective Park adds, and there's something different in her tone now, something that sounds almost like hope, that immunity doesn't extend to personal crimes against family members. It doesn't extend to child endangerment. It doesn't extend to conspiracy to commit fraud or attempted coercion. So even though he gets immunity on the business crimes, his actions toward you and toward Nji, those could still be prosecutable. Jihan looks up. What are you saying? He asks. I'm saying, Detective Park replies, that we can build a case. We can show the court that Han Jin-ho's interest in Nji is not paternal. It's predatory. We can show the pattern of manipulation, the surveillance, the orchestration. We can prove that his motivation is control, not love. And if we're smart and if we're thorough, we can make sure that the court denies his petition and bars him from having any contact with your son. She closes the folder. But it's going to require honesty, she adds. Jihan, you're going to have to testify. You're going to have to detail every crime your father made you complicit in. You're going to have to get on a stand and explain how a man can be your father and still be a monster. Are you prepared to do that? She leans back in her chair. Because there's another part of this. Detective Park continues. In exchange for Han Jin-ho's testimony, the prosecution is offering him complete immunity on all business crimes. But they also want him to provide the names of government officials, police officers, judges who are on his payroll. They want to know the extent of the corruption he's embedded in the system. And they're going to use that information to launch a massive internal investigation. She pulls out another document. Which means, Detective Park explains, that there are probably people in this system who don't know yet that Han Jin-ho is about to expose them. There are probably people who would very much like to silence him before he has a chance to testify. There are probably people who would also like to silence anyone connected to him. His son, for instance. She lets that sink in. Your father's deal provides him with protection. Detective Park continues. He gets government protection. He gets a new identity. He gets to disappear into a secure location where no one can reach him. But you don't get that same protection. You get trial. You get prosecution. And you get to exist in a world where people who my father exposed might decide to take revenge. Mrs. Han's support. Mrs. Han's office is the kind of space that intimidates through sheer elegance rather than ostentation. Natural wood. Soft lighting. Everything chosen with the precision of someone who understands that power is most effective when it whispers instead of shouts. It's 4 a.m. when Jihan and Zuri arrive, and Mrs. Han is already awake, already working, already deep in strategic planning. She's sitting behind her desk with her own documents spread out. Legal briefs, court filings, financial records. She's not waiting for information. She's already gathering it. She stands when they enter, walks around to greet them like they're equals, not like she's the woman who practically owns half of Seoul. She hugs Zuri first, which surprises both of them. Then she turns to Jihan and takes his face in her hands, studies him like she's looking for damage. You've been crying, she says. It's not a question. No, Jihan says, and his voice is steady. I've been learning that I'm a tool. That my entire life has been orchestrated. That the man who created me sees my son as leverage. But I haven't cried yet. I don't think I've processed enough to actually cry. Mrs. Han nods like she understands. She probably does. I know, she says, stepping back. I've known for days. Detective Park came to me before she came to you. Jihan's face registers surprise. How? He asks. Because I hired her, Mrs. Han replies. Well, I hired a firm that did the work. I wanted to know if my suspicions were correct. I've suspected for 3 years that your father was alive. The business patterns didn't make sense for someone truly dead. Dead men don't move money the way he's been moving money. She gestures for them to sit, and they do, feeling like they're in the presence of someone operating on a level of strategic thinking that most people never achieve. Why didn't you tell me? Jihan asks, and there's pain in his voice, the kind of pain that comes from realizing that people you trust have been keeping secrets. Because you needed to grieve, Mrs. Han says simply. She sits across from them, and her expression is open in a way that Mrs. Han's expression usually isn't. If I told you the truth, you would have spent the last 3 years looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to emerge. Instead, you spent it becoming your own man. Becoming someone who doesn't need his father's approval, or his shadow to exist. That was more valuable than the information would have been. She looks directly at Zuri. As for you and the child, she says, and her voice takes on a different quality, something that sounds almost like maternal protection, I've already contacted lawyers. The best ones. The ones who don't lose custody cases. The ones who understand family law at a level that most people never reach. I have 3 firms working on this simultaneously. I'm not leaving anything to chance. Can he actually win? Zuri asks. Can he actually get guardianship rights? Not if we're smart, Mrs. Han replies. He has money and legal resources, but what he doesn't have is love. He doesn't have a genuine relationship with the child. He doesn't have the kind of history with Nji that courts prefer to see. And most importantly, he has a documented pattern of viewing the child as leverage rather than as a person. The strategy. Mrs. Han stands, walks to her window overlooking Seoul. The city is just beginning to wake up. Dawn is breaking, turning the sky from black to gray to the pale blue of early morning. Your father, she says, looking back at Jihan, made one critical mistake. He underestimated how much you changed. How much she changed you. How much that love made you human in ways Han Jin-ho never learned to be. He thought he could still play you like a piece on a board. But you're not a piece anymore. You're a player. And I'm going to make sure that the court understands that. She returns to her desk, pulls out a document. I'm filing a counterpetition, she continues. I'm asking for legal guardianship of Nji, jointly with you and Zuri. I'm offering my resources, my stability, my love as additional protection. I'm not trying to replace you as his father, but I want the court to understand that this child has people who will fight for him with everything we have. She looks up at them. This is going to be a fight, Mrs. Han says. It's going to require honesty from all of us. Jihan, you're going to have to testify. You're going to have to get on a stand and detail crimes that you committed. You're going to have to face prosecution. But it's the only way to prove that your father is not to be trusted with the child's welfare. She leans forward. And Zuri, Mrs. Han continues, you're going to have to testify too. You're going to have to detail how your relationship with Jihan came about. You're going to have to explain how you've observed his character. You're going to have to paint a picture for the court of what your life is like with him. How you've seen him grow. How you've seen him try to be better. Zuri nods. She's not afraid of testimony. She's not afraid of standing up in a courtroom and telling the truth about what she's experienced. I'll do it, Zuri says. Whatever it takes. Mrs. Han smiles. It's a small smile but genuine. Good, she says. Because you're going to need all the strength you can find for what comes next. The revelation. But before any of that can happen, Mrs. Han reveals something else. She opens a drawer in her desk and pulls out a photograph. It's a recent photograph, maybe from the last few months, and it shows Jihan's father meeting with someone. This, Mrs. Han says, is a woman we've identified through our investigation. She's been in frequent contact with your father. She's been receiving payments from his accounts. She's been helping him coordinate his legal strategy for the custody hearing. Jihan leans forward, studying the photograph. I don't recognize her, he says. You wouldn't, Mrs. Han replies, because she doesn't exist. Not in any official capacity. Not with any identity that can be traced. But what we've discovered is that she has a connection to you. A biological connection. She lets that sink in. We believe, Mrs. Han continues, that this woman might be your half-sister. That your father, before he supposedly died, had a child with another woman. A woman who was apparently willing to work with him, to help him orchestrate this plan, to assist in his attempts to control your son. The room goes very quiet. We're still investigating, Mrs. Han says. We don't have confirmation yet. But if we're right, then your father's backup plan isn't just to use the courts. It's to use family. It's to use a half-sibling, who you don't even know exists, to create doubt about your legitimacy as Nji's father. Jihan's full testimony. The police station at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning is a different place than it is at 2 a.m. The sunlight comes through the windows. There are officers moving through the hallways. Feels more official somehow, more real. Like the world has acknowledged what's happening. Jihan sits in interview room 3 with Detective Park and a recording device. He knows what's about to happen. He's going to speak for 8 hours, maybe more. He's going to detail operations, money laundering schemes, people who disappeared, deals that cost lives. He's going to name names. He's going to trace money. He's going to become a witness who will help bring down the organization his father built. But before he does any of that, he calls his lawyer and makes sure that everything he says is protected, that nothing he reveals can be used against him without his consent, that his testimony is voluntary and informed. Then he starts talking. He talks about his first crime, a money transfer he didn't understand at 14 years old. His father gave him instructions. Move this money from account A to account B. Don't ask why. Don't question the process. Just do it. And Jihan, 14 years old and desperate to please his father, did it. He talks about his first act of violence, a man who owed his father money. Jihan was told to make sure he understood the consequences. Jihan was given specific instructions. Find him, hurt him, but don't kill him. Just make sure he understands what happens when you fail to meet obligations to Han Jin-ho. Jihan was 16 years old when he broke a man's leg. He talks about years of incremental steps, each one making the next step easier, each one building toward a person who could order someone's death without flinching, each one separating the boy who loved his mother from the man who became his father's tool. He talks about the time he was responsible for someone disappearing, a business partner who wanted to leave the organization, a man who got scared and tried to walk away. Jihan was ordered to make sure that didn't happen. Make sure he understand the consequences. Make sure he understand that walking away from Han Jin-ho means ceasing to exist. Jihan was 22 years old when he participated in a man's kidnapping. He talks about meeting Zuri, how she was like standing in sunlight after years in shadow, how loving her made him realize that the life he was living wasn't inevitable. It was a choice. And that realization that it had all been a choice meant that he could choose differently. He talks about trying to restructure Bo Group, trying to make it legitimate, trying to build a life that a woman like Zuri could respect. And how that entire effort was orchestrated by his father, designed to manipulate him into making specific decisions that served his father's long-term plan. 8 hours later, his voice is hoarse. His throat is dry. His soul feels hollow. My father, Jihan says into the recording, the words coming out slowly, like each syllable cost something precious. Watched this woman through pregnancy. He watched our baby be born. He gathered surveillance on a 10-month-old child. And he did all of this not out of love, but out of a need to control, to manipulate, to ensure that everything in his orbit existed for his purposes. That's not family. That's not grandfather love. That's a predator protecting his investment. Detective Park stops the recording. She leans back in her chair. That statement right there, she says quietly, will be used in custody hearings. That's the most powerful thing you've said all day. That's the thing that will make the judge understand exactly what your father is. Jihan leans back in his chair. He looks destroyed and somehow more at peace than he's looked in days. What happens now? He asks. Now, Detective Park says, we build the case. We file charges against you for crimes committed under your father's direction, but we recommend reduced sentences given your cooperation. We prepare for trial. And we prepare for the custody hearing. We're going to make sure that when Han Jin-ho walks into that courtroom, every judge, every lawyer, every court official understands exactly what he is. The broader investigation. But Detective Park has more news. She opens her notebook and begins to detail the investigation as it's unfolded over the past week. We've identified 17 officials in the Seoul Police Department who are on Han Jin-ho's payroll, she begins. That's 17 officers, some of them high-ranking, who've been receiving payments to provide information, to block investigations, to ensure that certain cases get dropped. We're moving against all of them simultaneously. There will be arrests tomorrow morning. She turns a page. We've identified 4 judges, she continues, 4 members of the judicial system who've been paid to rule in specific ways on specific cases. They're going to be investigated for corruption. Some of them will probably resign before that happens. Some of them will probably fight. But it's going to be a scandal. She turns another page. We've identified a network of money laundering operations that extends across Seoul, across the country, across Asia. Your father built an infrastructure that makes it possible to move billions of won while leaving almost no trace. Unraveling it is going to take years. But it's going to happen. She sets down her notebook. And we're looking at international connections. Detective Park adds. Your father's reach apparently extended beyond Korea. There are connections to criminal organizations in China, in Russia, in Southeast Asia. We've alerted international law enforcement. This is going to be bigger than just Seoul. This is going to be an international investigation. The question. Back at the house in Songbukdong, after they've left the police station, after the day has turned into evening and evening has turned into night, Jihan and Zuri sit in the darkness. The apartment feels different now. Less like a sanctuary. More like a space where something precious is under threat. They haven't turned on the lights. They're just sitting in the glow of Seoul's neon light coming through the windows, visible in the darkness like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. We could run, Zuri says. It's 2 a.m. They're not touching. There's a careful distance between them, like they're both afraid of what proximity might mean, what closeness might demand. Anywhere. America. Australia. Somewhere your father's reach doesn't extend. We could take him and just disappear. New names. New life. No one finding us. It's a fantasy they've both been entertaining. The fantasy where running is an option, where they can escape into a simpler world. He'd find us, Jihan says. His voice is certain. Men like my father don't stop. Even in witness protection, even on the other side of the world, he'd find a way. He'd move heaven and earth to remind us that he exists, that he's thinking about us, that we can never fully escape his shadow. He stands, walks to the window. Seoul sprawls below them, millions of lights, millions of people living millions of stories in their own small apartments, in their own small corners of the world. But we don't have to run, Jihan continues. We can stay. We can fight. We can use every resource we have to make sure that when my father's name comes up in court, the answer is no. Supervised visits? Denied. Guardianship? Denied. Any contact at all? Denied. We can build a case so airtight that the judge has no choice but to protect our son. He turns back to her. I'm going to have to testify against him, Jihan says quietly. I'm going to have to get on a stand and tell a court about every illegal thing he made me do. Every crime. Every moment I was complicit in his empire. They want immunity for him but not for me. I'm going to face prosecution. I might go to prison. Zuri's chest tightens. For how long? She asks. I don't know, Jihan replies. Months of trials. Possibly years. I don't know. But whatever the sentence is, I'll serve it. Because the alternative is letting my father win. The alternative is letting him have access to our son. And I won't do that. Not now. Not ever. The commitment. Zuri stands. Walks to him. Takes his face in her hands the way she's learned to do when she needs him to really hear her. When she needs her words to land not just in his ears but in his heart. Her hands are shaking. She notices this. She can feel the tremor in her fingers as they touch his face. But she doesn't pull away. She holds on. Then we do it, she says. Together. All the way. No more secrets. No more decisions made in the shadow. We fight with the light on. We fight with the world watching. And if you go to prison, then G and I wait. And when you come home, we're still here. You do that. His voice breaks slightly. You'd wait for me? Even knowing you could find someone else. Someone without a criminal father. Someone without a criminal past. Someone who could offer you a simpler life. I do that, she says. For the man who shows up at 7 a.m. to feed our son. I do it for the man who's trying to be better. I do it for the version of you that exists when you're with us. I do it because love isn't about easy. It's about choosing someone over and over again. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She pulls him close. They stand at the window looking out at Seoul, the city that brought them together and tried to tear them apart and might yet do either one. We're going to win, Zuri says. Not because we're perfect, but because we're real. Because we're choosing each other. Because when it comes to our son, we're stronger together than your father is alone. Jihan pulls back, looks at her face in the neon light. I love you, he says. I'm saying it now because tomorrow we enter this world of legal battles and testimony and prosecution. And I want you to know that underneath all of it, through all of it, I love you. Not as leverage. Not as a means to an end. I love you because you chose to stay even when it would have been easier to leave. The hearing. The courtroom is quiet in the way that courtrooms are quiet. Institutional. Formal. A place where lives get decided by people in robes behind large wooden desks. 3 weeks of legal preparation have passed. 3 weeks of testimony preparation. 3 weeks of Jihan detailing his crimes, his father's manipulation, the orchestration that shaped his entire life. But now the custody hearing. The moment that will decide whether Han Jin-ho has any legal standing in Ji's life. The judge is a woman named Im Hae-kyung. She's in her 60s, with a kind of face that's seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. She reads through the evidence with careful attention. The surveillance photographs. The bank statements. The video of Han Jin-ho explaining how he plans to use his grandson as leverage. Han Jin-ho sits in the witness box, looking thinner than in the video, looking like someone who's aged decades in just a few weeks. He's still handsome in a severe way. Still commands the space around him through sheer force of presence. He's dressed in an expensive suit, like he's still operating under the assumption that wealth and power can manipulate courtrooms. The judge asks him one question, and it's a good one. It's the question that cuts through all the legal maneuvering and gets to the heart of the matter. Do you love your grandson? The courtroom goes silent. Even the sound of breathing seems to stop. The court reporter's fingers hover above the keyboard. Everyone is waiting for this answer. Han Jin-ho pauses. Long enough that the people watching begin to understand what he's about to say. Long enough that the pause itself becomes an answer. I love what he represents, Han Jin-ho says finally. His voice is honest in a way that's almost worse than if he'd lied. Continuity. Legacy. The possibility of power extending beyond my life. Family name. Business succession. The idea that something of me will continue after I'm gone. It's the most honest thing he could say. It's also the most damning. I do not, Han Jin-ho continues, and there's something almost defiant in his tone, like he's decided that since he's already lost, he might as well be completely honest. Love him the way that his mother loves him. I do not love him as an individual. I love him as a concept, as an abstraction, as a representation of my impact on the world. The judge nods slowly. She doesn't write anything down. She doesn't need to. The court reporter is capturing every word. She looks through the file one more time. She reads Jihan's testimony. She watches the video of Han Jin-ho explaining his plan. She reads the surveillance reports. She reads the documentation of the orchestrated relationship between Zuri and Jihan. This court, Judge Im says, denies all guardianship rights to Han Jin-ho. There will be no visitation. There will be no supervised contact. There will be no legal standing in this child's life. This court finds that the petitioner has demonstrated a pattern of viewing the minor child as an asset rather than as a person worthy of protection and care. That is not in the best interests of the child. Case dismissed. The gavel comes down. The sound echoes through the courtroom like a final punctuation mark on a sentence. Zuri grips Jihan's hand. She doesn't cry. Not yet. There will be time for tears later. Right now she just holds on to the moment. Holds on to the fact that they won. As Han Jin-ho stands to leave the courtroom, he passes by Jihan's table. For a moment he pauses. He leans down and whispers something that only Jihan can hear. You think you've won. But the game isn't over. It's just evolved. It's a threat and a promise and the sound of someone who refuses to accept that he's lost. The email. And that's when Zuri's phone buzzes. An email. From an unknown sender. Subject. The woman before you. Her heart stops. She opens it. Attached. A photograph of a woman black with similar features to Zuri, but definitely someone else. Someone who looks like she belongs to the same family tree, but a different branch. The email contains just one line, one message that rewrites everything again. Your son has a half-sister. And she's coming to Seoul. Below that, a plane ticket. An arrival time. A hotel reservation. All arranged. All in progress. Jihan looks at the email. His face goes pale. What? Zuri whispers. A half-sister? Jihan says, reading the email again like the words might rearrange themselves into something that makes sense. I don't have a half-sister. I don't know anyone. But even as he says it, he understands. His father's insurance policy. His father's backup plan. His father's way of ensuring that the game isn't actually over. Somewhere on a plane. Somewhere between here and there. There's a woman who carries Jihan's blood, who might carry claims on his inheritance, who might carry secrets that could destroy everything he's built. A woman who apparently looks similar enough to Zuri to send a message about identity, about family, about the ways that blood can complicate love. And she's coming to Seoul. The implication. Zuri turns to Jihan, her face a mixture of confusion and anger and fear. Did you know? She asks. Did you know you had a half-sister? No, Jihan says, and his voice is hollow. I have no idea who this woman is. I have no record of my father having another child. There's nothing in the family documentation, nothing in his business records. This is completely new information. He takes the phone from Zuri, studies the photograph more carefully. Wait, he says. I recognize her. Zuri's stomach drops. You what? I've seen her before, Jihan continues. Not recently, but years ago. I saw her in a photograph in my father's office. I asked him who she was and he said she was a cousin. A distant cousin from the Japanese side of the family. But looking at her now, seeing the features, seeing the way her eyes are shaped exactly like mine, that's not a cousin. That's family. That's someone I share blood with. He stands, walks to the window. My father lied about her, Jihan says. He's been lying about her for years. Which means she's been part of his world for years. Which means she might know things. She might have information. She might have been helping him this entire time. Zuri feels a chill move through her body. What is she coming to Seoul for? Zuri asks. To continue what our father started, Jihan says quietly. To use leverage against me. To use Mji. To use you. To ensure that the game continues even though our father is now in protective custody, even though the courts have denied him access to our son, even though he's supposed to be disappearing into a government program. He turns back to face her. My father's backup plan wasn't just the courts, Jihan continues. It was family. A half-sister who exists outside the legal jurisdiction of his case. A half-sister who might have claims on his assets, his business, his legacy. A half-sister who, if she's anything like him, will do anything to maintain power. The cliffhanger. Zuri's phone buzzes again. Another email. This time with an actual message. I'm Hanuri. Your half-brother doesn't know me, but I know everything about him. Everything about his child. Everything about his new girlfriend. I'm arriving in Seoul in 48 hours. And I have a proposition for you all. We can do this the hard way or we can do this the easy way. But either way, I'm not leaving without what's mine. Attached? Another photograph. Hanuri dressed impeccably, standing in front of a private jet. Looking exactly like someone who knows how to operate in the world of power and leverage and control. Jihan and Zuri look at each other in the courtroom hallway. The victory of their custody hearing suddenly feeling very hollow, very temporary, very much like the eye of a storm rather than the end of one.